And these are all notes from the recent training. Let's start a new page. Okay, so actually let's not go to the screen first. So I was born in Manila. Manila is one of the busiest cities in the world. It's actually the fifth largest urban center on the planet. The Philippines has 110 million people. My country is known to be the most disaster-struck country in the world. So in many ways, we get hit by storms, earthquakes. So there's something about the energy of the mother that deals with chaos and destruction that uh, we're able to channel from our culture and the energy of the land. So it makes sense for people that this comes from the Philippines in a way. The Philippines holds a very strong relationship with the energy of the mother. Um, so I grew up in Manila, and I very early was called to go in a spiritual process. I had these very powerful experiences where I was hearing a voice that spoke about the need to go back to the earth. So one day I basically walked away from everything. Um, I didn't have any money, and I just listened to the voice. I think a lot of us hear the voice, but we don't always listen to the messages. So I I did this. I walked. I walked away. I walked for one whole year without any money, listening to the voice, and I I saw so many things. I found many many things that I was supposed to see about the world, about spirit, about the human body. So a lot of what I share with you happened to me in 2 years when I lived alone on an island without being with other human beings. I basically lived on a coconut diet and I went into a breatharian lifestyle for 2 years. And in that space, I experienced the energy. That's when the mother came through me, and I experienced all of these things that many people are experiencing now. Like something moved through my body, and I experienced other dimensions of time and space, what might be beyond the third dimension or the fourth dimension. So when I was ready, I was asked to come back to the world, and I had found a way to touch people. And what I had learned in the island, um, it activated people's bodies, and the energy really just spread more and more across Asia, across Australia, the Americas, Africa, and throughout Europe, the Middle East. So we are here now towards the end of 2023, and we actually have learned so much about what this is, where it's coming from, who are we, what are we, where are we going, what are we becoming. We've learned a lot about the brain, the nervous system. We are learning a lot about the true nature of food, sleep, um, the dream state. And over the years, we have worked a lot with the medical system, with schools, with parents, with governments. So we try to bring more understanding, using language that is clear and acceptable within systems. We don't use spiritual terminologies. The spiritual awakening is real, but in a way, everything is spiritual. So we're very careful about the terminologies that we use. At the same time, we try as much as we can that when we conduct this work, we actually understand what is happening, that we know what is happening. So I feel one powerful way to start is to actually share with you how did we come into an understanding of what it is that we do. In the inner dance community, we don't simply ask people to lay down on the floor and to close their eyes, and then we play music and then we touch people's bodies. It's also not always about the movement, because there's a lot of interest in this movement that people say is the Kundalini coursing through the body. A lot of beautiful experiences. The most powerful experiences are often happening when the body isn't moving anymore. We also want to talk about the possible issues or problems that come up in the process when we do this long enough, like when we change or alter perception, when we go into an alteration of experience, we also alter the brain, we change the brain. And when we change the brain and the nervous system, what are the possible issues that can be balanced out if we knew what we are doing? So there are issues like spiritual addiction. There are issues like ego inflation. There are also issues of losing certain cognitive functions, certain aspects of the mind, so that when people do this for long enough, there are actually certain effects of losing memory, losing certain parts of the thinking process, because that is the formula for experiencing the energy. Experiencing the energy means forgetting many patterns that are embedded in the brain and in the body. What does it mean to not have to lose certain things just so we can forget the things that maybe are not suitable or do not match the higher aspirations, the higher self version of ourselves. So it took us a long time to actually map this out, and working with doctors, working with scientists, there are meeting points now where we actually feel very understood by communities that don't always look at the spiritual or energetic community. So if you have inside you, like many of the ones who come here, an interest in allowing the different domains of the world to meet, I hope that I can assist your journey in learning how to stay in this for a long time. That maybe 10 years is still something that you're conducting, that you're interested in, that you're giving to others. Maybe 20 years later, you're still doing this. Maybe 30 years later, you're going to be doing this. And so I've been doing this for almost 20 years. And there actually were many points when I almost stopped doing this, maybe 3 or 4 times. I almost stopped doing this because of the problems that I didn't just see in myself, but they are in fact quite common in the spiritual journey. So yeah, let's bring up balance as the overall theme for today. Okay, so in the beginning, a lot of the interest in the inner dance that allowed this to be trustworthy across the world had to do with spiritual nutrition. Let me use my notebook now. Yeah, it helps me to map out my mind when I can think out loud through the image. Yeah, that's okay. Spiritual nutrition. When I received messages from Spirit, the instructions were to understand that we came from light, that we are light beings, and we need to understand that the real food is made of light. And that is the reason why I stayed in an island. I'm not an artist, so I can't really draw a coconut tree. But that's why I stayed on an island alone for 2 years. I was interested in light. Coconuts contain the highest electrolyte frequency in all known foods in the world. So the Philippines is the second largest producer of coconuts on the planet. So when I was alone, sometimes eating, sometimes not eating anything, it was because my training was all about living on light. I was interested in the body becoming light. I was interested in increasing the frequency in my system. So I had to get away from other human beings. So when I experienced the inner dance, which a lot of people now call Kundalini, um, it was all about that. And so when I would hold people's bodies, they too would experience light. So we need to then probably understand what is light? What does it mean to become light? To have light, to be light. So when you experience the process, whatever you call it, you can call it Kundalini, you can call it inner dance. We have to account for something that is quite obvious in the experience. We feel it easily. Let me just make some space. When we have conducted trainings over maybe 12, 13 years now, we have to account for something that goes up and goes down. You can feel it in people's bodies. You can feel it in your own body mind. And the body mind really is one, which we call energy. They're all this, it's all the same. Um, I want to initially speak about why we use music. Is music important? Why are we using it? What is its role? So in the beginning, I wasn't using music. I would touch people's bodies, and there would already be this activation. Mm, but I knew it could go deeper, and so um, I lived alone as a very poor person without money for a long time. And then when I came back to the world, I received a gift from my mother, whom I didn't see for a really long time. I don't know what inspired her to give me this gift, but the gift was, let me see. It was basically an iPod. It was my first iPod. This was in 2008. And the iPod was filled with so many songs. And I knew that this would help me spread the message of the Earth Mother. I love music. If I could choose a spiritual practice, it would be music. If I could choose an art, if I could choose an expression, it would be music. I was a healer. I could help people with their diseases, with their mental functions, but it would be mostly in a one-on-one situation where when I traveled, people started to understood that I had this gift to offer others. um, they would follow me around, the people, and then they would line up. There would be really long lines, and they would ask me, okay, can I experience that? Can you help me? I have these problems. Um, I realized that when I connected like the energy, music, the brain, collective consciousness, where I was healing people the whole entire day. And I don't believe in healing in the sense that I don't believe that we're here to heal other people. This is important. So let me speak this slowly so that maybe you might remember this later on. If you're holding a notebook, you could write this down. We do not heal anyone. Transmission does not happen. We create conditions where healing happens on its own. You have to hear this from a man who was alone when I experienced this. There was no Shaktipat, there was no guru, there was no teacher. We are our own source of wisdom and energy. We do not heal anyone. We create the conditions where healing happens on its own. The idea that we heal others is coming from a very old patriarchal story. And if you were to work with the energy of the matriarchal, the mother, the feminine, we do not create dependencies. We do not get addicted to power. We do not enjoy this feeling that we are helping others. What we do is we help others help themselves, because this is the greatest gift we can ever give. It's independence. Music clarified this. So instead of me working on so many people who would line up all wanting to be healed, I realized that I don't have to do this the whole day. I could do this in 1 hour. I could be with 100 people in 1 hour, and we could journey together. And then they would all disperse and leave, and I would continue my own purgation, my own clarification, my own conversation with spirit. And this is what had spread. This is what a lot of people are using now as a main tool. The other tools would be ways of positioning the body. This is called proprioception. Let's go back to the screen. Yeah, I think we're going along. Let's start a new page here. Maybe we're veering into the question, why or how does it happen? This is a question on causality. Where is it coming from? How does it happen? So this is not just for you. Were you to learn how to facilitate others, these are questions people would ask. So what we've established so far is it comes from light. It begins with light. It has something to do with the alteration of mind and body, which is mediated by the brain and the central nervous system. And music is an entrainment device that can allow this to spread, not just in the brain or central nervous system of one person, but also throughout the planet. Conducting, let me make this smaller just to make some space. Conducting this work, most of our trainings begin with a particular sacred geometrical symbol, and it is this one. The name of this is the Vesica Pisces. And the Vesica Pisces is basically formed when you bring two beings, two entities, two circles together, creating like a space in the middle, a third space. So the Vesica Piscis is a representation of something that goes up and something that goes down. What we're actually looking at is light. This is what light looks like. When people think light, what we think of as lightness or energy. Light is actually two things turning into each other, and basically that's electricity and magnetism. Okay, so I had to bring up the topic of music primarily. Oops, I erased the Vesica. I don't think we need this anyway. Let me erase that. I brought up music early because it is in music that you would probably account for the fact that there is something that goes up and something that goes down equally. There's something in the music that holds fast and slow. And this is something you might experience in rhythm. It's something you might experience in frequency. It could be in terms of tonality, texture, tempo. Music actually belongs to the body. Music is brain, breath, and blood. Harmony, melody, and rhythm, in fact, mirrors what's happening in the heart, in the brain, and in the breath. But let's not go too fast. Let's slow down. So we're trying to define the my iPad does this automatic going into the eraser when I just want the pen. Light is basically an electromagnetic wave. And so it's two parts. It's basically electricity and magnetism turning into each other. So magnetism is usually presented to be something that begins up here at the top, and electricity is down here. So when people speak about the Kundalini rising, that could be the electricity, the feminine archetype that rises from the lower part of the body. If this was maybe the chakra system, that which arises is what people account for as Kundalini. But for that to rise, something must fall. Something must fall. So magnetism is very much akin to the mind. Electricity would be what people call, say, life force energy. So this is the basic principle. Like everything that we know about this has something to do with learning how to bring about an energy descent, even as what happens is an energy ascent takes place. So this is a grand simplification. What this probably looks like is something that looks like the DNA where there's a double helix. This is light. Light is an magnetic wave. It's two things turning into each other. And so when we conduct the work that we do, we honor light. We bring about lightness in the process where disease, depression, and suffering, in fact, happens when the mind is not able to descend and the energy inside of us is not able to rise. So when you think about it, like everything that we regard as the tools, it could be music, it could be touch, it could be words, it could be proprioception is how the body is positioned. It speaks about how our awareness shifts when we position ourselves. When we shape our bodies differently, our minds would experience a different sense. Okay, there are other tools, and sense is maybe the word to describe those tools. So intuitively, that is the basic that people start with. Okay, something must go down and something must go up. when you think about the very practice of asking someone to lay down in a certain way, that's proprioception. And when we close our eyes, something is already affected, and maybe we want to study what does the horizontal position, horizon, is to see as far as you can see. What is the horizontal position with eyes closed? What does that already do even before you conduct the music? So these two parts that we describe, being the M and the E, yes, magnetism and electricity, we don't stop here. We don't oversimplify this simply to be a manifestation of light. In order to bring more complex understanding that shifts our understanding from a descriptive length to an explanatory length, we go to the brain. What is the manifestation of magnetism and electricity in the brain? So here we would talk about what is called the autonomic nervous system. In this day and age, so many people are interested in the brain and are studying brain science. So this may not be so unfamiliar for a lot of you. For the sake of simplicity, let's call it the ANS. And the most important word here is the A. It's autonomy. What is autonomy? What is autonomic? So there's a part of your body that is autonomous. Autonomy means the body acts on its own wisdom, that the body knows what to do. So when the body starts to move without you telling it what to do, the body actually starts to inform the mind. There's a reversal, whereas usually it's the mind that informs the body. There's something in the body that is truly wise, and that which regulates that is the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system is made up of two parts. One part is called the sympathetic nervous system, and the other is the parasympathetic nervous system. And so this is representation. This is magnetism, and in a way, this is electricity. Let's study what that means, basically. For that, I think we need to do more visual mapping. So let me go to my computer brain to first study this. Okay. Let's look at this picture first. It's a lot more easy to use as a starting point. Wait, let me see if I have a better picture. It's not as clear with that one. I think yeah, we don't have a choice. I think we're stuck with that one. Okay. Okay, so the sympathetic, start with this. The sympathetic nervous system is what is normally called fight or flight. At least here we can see the word stress, which speaks about fear, excitement. Whenever the heartbeat palpitates faster, the sympathetic nervous system awakens. So the parasympathetic nervous system is normally called rest and digest. Usually what we first point out here is very, very simple. The parasympathetic nervous system, excuse me for drawing very, this is going to be quite hard because I'm using my cursor. Parasympathetic nervous system happens when you open the body. The sympathetic nervous system is awakened when we use trigger mechanisms that in fact interact or brings about the confrontation of fear. Okay. I'm hoping some of you already know what the sympathetic nervous system is, so there's little confusion. One thing I want to point out here is in the PSNS, or the parasympathetic nervous system, that helps the body to relax and to open, the extensions are mapped out rather simply to be here at the top and at the bottom. So this is what's called the cranium area and the sacrum area. So at this point, we could maybe try to look at this from a more graphic or visual space. So the cranial nerves would be here. It would be C3, C5, 7, 9, and 10. The vagus nerve especially has the most parasympathetic outflows, and at the bottom would be the cranium. So there's a reason why facilitators go for this area of what is behind the head, the neck region, and the sacrum, like the hips, the legs. It's basically because of this mapping. When you want the body to open up, then you activate the parasympathetic nervous system outflows, and fear, fight or flight, extends here in the middle of the spine. So there's a reason then why the body does these motions when the activations occur. It is because of the spinal openings, or our ability to open and trigger these areas. If this is the cranium, and then this is the cranium and the sacrum, there's something about the simultaneous co-activation of both regions in the system. So what is important here in mapping the sympathetic nervous system is it's from the thoracolumbar region where fear and excitement extend. So it's from T1 to L, it's over here, it's L3. If you were to send out signals that would trigger neurotransmitters and hormones that would awaken the energy inside people's bodies, there is in fact a region. So there's a reason why people go for the chest or for the abdomen. I mean, what is here in the chest? The heart is in the chest. And then here, what you have is the kidneys and the adrenaline gland, the cortex, the adrenal medulla, which is where the sympathetic fight or flight chemicals are managed. So from a neurological perspective, there is in fact a whole reasoning or rationalization for why do you hold these areas. It's spinal in nature, the spine being a highway system for electricity or magnetism to create transmission across the, let's say, from the brain throughout the whole body, which would then involve the muscles and the sensory receptors in the hands, the feet, the legs. There are really just these two counteracting with each other. Let me go back to my iPad now that we've shown that. So that's the starting point. That's maybe the most basic. That's the most basic training framework that we start out with. Every time we start a conversation, this is where we can expand from. And then we can build a lot of complexity after this. So let's go then deeper into music. Music activates the autonomic nervous system. Music entrains the brain, parts of the brain that then entrains parts of the autonomic nervous system. Now, when we talk about this, we're really not just talking about the nervous system, the brain, the central nervous system, or the peripheral nervous system. There are two aspects of the peripheral nervous system. For one, we already covered the autonomic nervous system of this one. So these are the parts of your nervous system that you do not control. Something issues its own control. The other aspect would be the somatic nervous system. And for those who have questions about how do you interrelate something like inner dance or kundalini to, let's say, yoga or exercise or even breath work, the somatic nervous system maps out the parts of your nervous system that you can control. You have control over the somatic nervous system. You can control. The autonomic nervous system is quite the opposite. It controls what? It controls your sleep-wake cycle. It controls your heart. Could be your heart rate, could be the stroke volume, all of which are undergoing rapid changes in the work that we do. It controls the breathing patterns. And all of these do influence the way we perceive and experience emotions. It controls fear and trust responses. The autonomic nervous system controls your digestion. It controls thermoregulation, which is heat. So sometimes you might experience the body getting very hot or very cold during the process. It also controls pain responses and pleasure responses. So when people experience bliss, it's primarily because of the autonomic nervous system. What else is there? It controls the reproductive system. Now, in the long term, we also would understand that the autonomic nervous system controls metabolism and immunity. So were you to be interested later on in healing? Okay, let's say you're in general, a lot of people are interested in bringing about an experience of energy. An experience of energy. I think this needs to be thicker. An experience of energy. Experiences in many ways are fast acting, but not long lasting. It's short lasting. So sometimes when you have an experience, some people say, oh, it changed my life. But actually, when you conduct changes in the nervous system, the changes don't actually last very long. For that reason, people get addicted to the experience. People want to keep coming back to the sessions. So good facilitators actually try to find a way for participants not to keep going back to the sessions. Whenever that happens, we are creating what's called dependency and reliance. And when we study that, we would realize that when you activate the nervous system in certain ways, what we are actually activating is what is called the dopaminergic or mesolimbic pathway, which relies on the most addictive chemical that builds up anticipation and expectation, and that is called dopamine. When you expose people to music, certain touch, certain pleasurable experiences, we release a lot of dopamine, which brings about bliss and pleasure, but at the same time, it in fact creates dependency. It makes people want to keep going back. The reason why we can trust this is there are ways to release other hormones and neurotransmitters like serotonin, like oxytocin, like prolactin, and so on and so forth. So when you become interested in these concepts, you're not just altering experience, you are in fact beginning to alter metabolism patterns and also immunity. And these are basically the changes that are long lasting. And although it's slow acting, so you need to build patience to this. If you are in a hurry, if you don't have patience, if you want the energy to always be big, to come fast, to excite people, you're not actually involving metabolic rates. What you're doing is you're feeding experience seeking, and that is the opposite of what is fast acting, slow acting, and long lasting. So when you start to study these, you would shift later on after studying the nervous system, the next point of study, and this could take months or years for you to shift into, you would start to study what's called the endocrine system, which is, it is more or less interacting with the nervous system, but this is a whole different degree of study, and I'm not sure how much we can go into that today. Okay, so for now, we're trying to establish what is the autonomic nervous system. When you activate the autonomic nervous system, which is what we work with in inner dance and Kundalini, we create changes in every single one of these. So for a lot of you are already experiencing changes in the way you're sleeping. And sleep especially has many stages. There is what's called non-REM sleep, and then there's called REM sleep. And then in terms of wake, you actually start to experience different wake-based experience. It could be either non-REM wake and REM. Right, let's make some space. Wake. It's like going into the dream state while awake, which normally you can only access during REM sleep. So that's one of the things to study or to track in the long term. You start to take control of your heartbeat in a way that your heart actually influences the way you think and the way you behave, the way you speak. So a lot of people would notice that I'm not reacting to situations that I used to be afraid of in the past. I'm beginning to trust life, others, myself. And that has to do with changing the autonomic nervous system responses that are usually interrelated with stress. So a lot of our actions and thought patterns are to avoid stress. So there's a reason why we ask people to go through the work. When we ask people to lay down, to expose themselves to all the functions that we, touch, sound, music then becomes understood as a trigger mechanism. Music is one of the, if not the most powerful trigger mechanisms that activates the autonomic nervous system. So if you are triggering the autonomic nervous system, that means you are triggering all of these. You are able to create the shifts according to all of these things that you do not control, but are controlled by what is autonomous. And the benefit to that is that the ANS is regulated by reactions, what you might call response mechanisms. So people who are responding in ways that are anxious and afraid and controlling, when we open up the autonomic nervous system, shifting from the sympathetic, which is fight or flight or even freeze, we get to shift into trust and rest and digest. Let's just call it trust. That is the main benefit of the work that we do. People learn to trust rather than to be afraid or to fight or to run away whenever there's a problem. So probably you've already been noticing this in your system, and if you've been holding space, you've probably been noticing this in other people. So that is the main benefit and why we bring understanding to this and why we conduct this for others. Okay, so this is where we start. Let's clean this up now. I don't think we need this anymore now that you might have mapped it out. This is being recorded, so you do have access to a lot of this. Now, the autonomic nervous system is very, very sensitive to dualities. And the main duality that human beings and other organisms experience on Earth has to do with light or dark. Okay? Light or dark. We know that there are certain times of the day where the energy needs to go up. Okay? You need to go to work, take care of the children, you go to school, and then there's a time of the day where the energy needs to go down. So this is when you rest. This is when you balance out your energies. So there is a certain wave that allows these to be regulated according to what happens in the 24-hour cycle. And for those who live in seasonal climates, the light and dark shift greatly throughout the year. So especially right now in places like Europe, there could be more of this and maybe less of this. So we're not just looking at 24 hours, we're also looking at 12 months. So the body learns how to regulate or manage itself. Now, why am I talking about this? It's because this is what we're tapping into, and this is also what might be undergoing changes when we expose ourselves to the work. So very early on in conducting this work, we already noticed that there was a certain wave that is conducted through the process. And in the work that we do, this is called the Inner Dance playlist. So when my mother gave me my first iPod, I knew that there was a certain pattern that I needed to construct in order to hold a 1 hour journey. Now, 1 hour is not exactly the usual optimal length of a process. It's not 60 minutes. Ideally, a journey might actually need to be around 90 minutes or 1.5 hours. And I'll give you the reasoning for that. It's because 90 minutes is approximately how long it takes for a human being to go through one sleep cycle. When you go to sleep, normally you go through about 5 or 6 sleep cycles. So what the energy does is it actually mimics only one sleep cycle. And a sleep cycle is basically a journey into the optimal state where healing happens. Mostly it's the journey into REM sleep, which is when dream happens. Dream is exciting because we can go into the world of mystery, but from a biological perspective, the REM state actually holds secrets to metabolism and healing, wisdom, there are a lot of things that happens in the REM state. So there is a reason why we sleep, and it's very paradoxical. It has a name. Uh, Not that. Another name for REM, REM, rapid eye movement, is paradoxical sleep. So when you study the brain while a person is in REM state, the brain actually looks like it is awake. That is why it's paradoxical. The brain actually looks like it's awake. So something is sleeping, but something is waking up. And what is waking up, if it's not our consciousness, it's basically a certain vibration or a certain set of vibrations. And we can name some of those. They might be called gamma state or gamma brainwave or gamma neural oscillation, or it could also be high oscillating frequencies. These are the vibrations that are much faster. The frequencies are more and amplitude is less, as opposed to the slower brain waves such as gamma. Gamma is beta, sorry. Beta consciousness. Beta and alpha are very, especially beta is very good at solving problems and holding thinking process, like logic. So a lot of this, in fact, shuts down when we go into the dream state and into inner dance. And what happens is we start to enter into the higher neural oscillations of brain waves, like gamma and high oscillating frequencies, whilst also hosting the slower waves. Okay, it could be called theta or delta. So these brain waves are very hard to come by when we are awake. Okay, they're high in amplitude but less in frequency. So what we're going to define here is REM state or REM sleep is basically a co-activation of the faster brain waves, gamma and HOF, and also the slow brain waves, theta and delta. They're co-activations. And to generalize that a little bit more, what happens in dream state is also there is a simultaneous co-activation between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. A long time ago, when people ask me, why does it happen? And what do you do? What is the inner dance? What I would tell them is that inner dance is the ability to be afraid, so the ability to be scared. Okay, I think it sounds better to just say the ability to be scared without being afraid. The ability to be scared without being afraid. And this is what it means to co-activate the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. For you to understand this, later on, you would need to maybe study what are the chemistries that awaken the system. And these are called stimulants. These are uppers. These would be epinephrine. This would be dopamine. These would be orexin. This would be histamine. It's the elements that wake up the system. And the parasympathetic nervous system would activate when we release what's called depressants. This would be acetylcholine, serotonin, oxytocin, and so on and so forth. So when there is a simultaneous co-activation between these two, what happens is we actually enter a magical state called the dream state. When you study drug effects, a psychedelic or a hallucinogenic or what might be called a psychoactive substance is in fact a simultaneous co-activation between stimulants and depressants. So when you study why people go into dream states whilst taking ayahuasca or magic mushrooms, it's because these substances mentioned contain both stimulating and depressing chemistries. And when you co-activate these together, people go into a dream state. So in a way, you actually go into a psychedelic process every single night, every time you sleep. And some people might say, okay, I don't actually dream. That is impossible. Everyone dreams. The moment you stop dreaming is the moment you die. You need to go into dream state in order to live, because when people don't enter into the dream, disease and death actually happens. So this is how we're bringing healing to people. When we bring people closer to the optimal states, which is when there's a simultaneous co-activation of the fast and the slow, that's what is allowing all of these to happen. So going back to this, wait, I find this dirty. Let's clean this up. The science of dream then would shift from just merely understanding the autonomic nervous system from the Vesica Pisces model, magnetism and electricity, or the sympathetic or parasympathetic. We may actually need to understand how does the autonomic nervous system involve a clockwork throughout the 24 hours or 12 months, the circadian rhythm or the circannual rhythm. So there is an actual wave that looks like this. Okay, wait, let's make this better. There is a real wave that looks like this. I'm still not happy with that. It's hard to draw it in my iPad. Let's make this thicker. So this is how we design the process. Okay, let's make a grid. Let's make this bigger. This is delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. Delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. So there's a reason why we use music in a certain way. This is basically a sleep cycle. And there are stages here called N1, N2, N3 stage. And then here would be called REM sleep. And here you would go back into N2. So when we study this, we would actually uncover what are called the 12 stages of awakening that facilitators around the world are trained to conduct in order to bring about oneness. If I was to quickly go through it, and we don't really have that much time to go into this, it would be satisfaction, dissatisfaction. Maybe I can just mark this quickly after this so that you can study this in the long term. Number 3 would be threshold. Number 4 would be purgation. Number 5 would be disintegration. Number 6 would be the awakening process. Number 7 would be illumination. Number 8 would be called choice. Number 9 would be success and failure. Number 10 would be called the dark night of the soul. Number 11 would be the unitive state, which is actually the state of oneness when we have transcended duality. Number 12 would be the reintegration process. So these 12 stages have guided facilitators for so many years now. Okay, like maybe this is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, 5. This is the number 5, 6, 7. I'm not gonna itemize this so much. I'm just going to point out to you that there's a reason why we choose to do what we do at the stages that things are happening. Maybe just to introduce you to the concept, within satisfaction, dissatisfaction, and threshold, there are stages in the awakening process, or I don't like to say awakening. I would like to say transformation or change. In the first stage of the awakening, this accounts for the initial duration when the energy goes up. In the stages, we have to open up the space and trust until we start to reveal possible tensions that are trapped in the body. And the threshold would be here, what would be in the sleep cycle called non-REM 2. And the threshold is when people reach a catharsis or a point of, I've had enough. I am not happy with my life. I would like to move to another space of integrity. So the release would be when the energy starts to fall, which is when emotions appear. Okay, like people cry, people release, people perform what are called the kriyas, which is the spontaneous release of letting go. These are, in fact, actually built into non-REM stages when bodies would start to shift into the lowest point of sleep. The most surrender happens in slow wave sleep. Okay, this is when we experience the most delta energy, the most relaxed, the most trusting, the deepest energy process. So there's something in the playlists that needs to account for the functions and benefits that happens in slow wave sleep. So when you're building the process, don't have the temptation of just making the energy go up instantly to try to build up the catharsis, to try to make people raise their so-called kundalini and cry and make their bodies move. In respect to what in fact happens in the body, there is a nadir. Oops, there is a nadir or a 0 point that takes place before bodies are able to go into true and authentic REM state. So that entry stage is called the disintegration process, and a lot of that happens only after purgation or release. Then and there, a real awakening happens, followed by an illumination where questions and ideas, visions might appear following certain questions that take place in number 6. Choice follows, and people acting upon their insights would experience duality because of certain unhealed areas of their lives. And the detachment that would follow that allows beings to find out that they are their own source of energy, that the truth is hiding inside the organism. We have to go through the dark night of the soul, which is the deepest cleansing experience. And only then, according to certain mystics, do we enter into the state of oneness, or what's called a unitive state. And because you're conducting this within a certain duration of 60 minutes to 90 minutes, you would have to bring people back into a state of reintegration when you end the journey or the experience. So this is called the 12 stages. So as you can see, there are certain stages that arise where the energy arises. There are certain stages and where the energy descends or go down and then arises again. And then here is a stage where the energy goes up and down. And then here it goes down, and here it goes up, and here it goes down again. So for you to track this within the mapping, there are in fact 4 nadirs. A 0 point starts here in stage 1, in stage 5, like right here, stage 5. And then in the dark night of the soul, which would be stage 10. And then when you end the process, which is in reintegration, so it would be here, 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 and here. So when you construct a journey, don't just make the energy go up like that. Some people even just start right up and then keep making it go up, trying to trigger people because of maybe inbuilt insecurities of wanting to prove something to others, coming from low self-esteem, overexcitement. These are category mistakes of beginner facilitators. There is, in fact, a whole science or a whole framework in which the energy rises and falls according to a system that either has psychological or biological reasonings. This is not by any means strict. There is no one-to-one correspondence between the sleep cycle or this the circadian rhythms and the 12 stages of transformation. There are possibilities where you can maybe start actually from even number 3, go straight into number 6, or maybe number 8 goes back to number 2. These are interchangeable. So for that reason, whatever elements you decide to work with, you have the freedom to perceive that in a whole room, maybe of 10 to 20 people, the stages would be intermixed. You do have the capacity to try to involve everyone within the wave that you design from 60 or 90 minutes. And one reasoning why this is valuable is to bring about, let's say, an understanding of emotion. Emotion is body-based intelligence. Emotion assists with the building of homeostasis or finding balance in the body. So sometimes bodies need to move from, let's say, is it possible to experience joy without experiencing despair? Is it possible to experience forgiveness without experiencing, let's say, anger or resentment? Is it possible to experience self-worth without experiencing shame? So you have actually a lot of creative lines to bring in the power of emotions when you go into the science and spirit of song selection and combination, which is very, very intuitive. There is a whole conversation to have on why is there a certain order to the journey that you're designing, however long it is. It could even be just 20 minutes. In our community, in inner dance, we don't just use songs. We use silence, we use vibrations, we use noises, noise generators, because of certain understandings of the semantic networks scattered across the body that you can prime through what would be called the iconic, the echoic, or the semantic network. Okay, so this basically is just an understanding of the images and the sounds and the words that are triggered in the body. So if you are able to coordinate not just music, but the way that you speak and the way that you hold bodies, you can do this in a wave-like structure, according to this and according to this. It's the same wave. It's the same wave. The 12 stages is the psychological, and the sleep cycle is the biological. So emotions and it's called priming. Anything that you say, anything that you sound out, any movement that you make will influence the network, the iconic network. All the images that anyone's ever seen, could even be colors or shapes. Every sound and all the words, all concepts and ideas will be triggered in the dream process whenever you ask people to surrender in the autonomic nervous systems simultaneous co-activation that brings about the dream state. Okay, so this is basically the introduction into, I gave you two concepts here at the same time. The wave, let's just call it the wave, which describes the design of the music and touch and the way energy rises and falls, which we say is embedded in the body because of evolution. It took a very long time for the body to learn how to regulate itself within life, within sleep and wake. And we also covered the 12 stages of transformation. I hope that's valuable to you. Let's go into other study points. If you had a really long time to study this, what else would maybe come up? Okay, I guess thinking about it, let's go into, let's talk about addiction, not just spiritual addiction, because spiritual awakenings do help people to move away from addictions to food, to certain beverages, to certain drugs, to certain habits, certain emotions even, uh, certain human relationships. Addiction is an important topic because we are altering the dopamine production and release elements in the body. Dopamine is just one of the many chemicals. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. We involve a lot of neurotransmitters, hormones, and enzymes in the work that we do. But the most powerful one is dopamine. And dopamine influences the following. It's emotion, attention, and memory, and also motor programs or body movement. Without having to go too deeply into this, I want to explain to you that a lot of the techniques that we have learned over the years is in fact related to how to reroute dopamine from these normal centers that bring about addictive patterns. So addiction has to do with expectation. You know, maybe you walk into a room and then people are holding expectations, wanting or needing so much to have certain experiences because maybe they got exposed to certain things they saw on social media. They watched videos where, okay, this is supposed to happen in people's bodies. Why is that not happening to me? Anticipation, need. So the very techniques that we use is designed to, in fact, help people to break expectations and anticipation. It's to help to break these patterns. It's to break these patterns. And how we do that is precisely this, to reroute dopamine that usually is sent out to, let's say, the amygdala manages emotion, the prefrontal cortex manages attention, the hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex manages memory, and the nucleus accumbens manages motor programs. So when we send dopamine to other centers in the brain, and I will name that now, it's called the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia is the part of the brain that is called the reptilian brain, the primitive brain, the instinctive brain. It's called the reptilian brain is a common nomenclature for the basal ganglia, the reptilian brain. Let's go look at what the basal ganglia actually looks like. This is quite interesting to map this out. Okay, we study the brain a lot in our trainings. We study the outer brain. This is the new brain. This is the neocortex. So we study the activations that go on in the different cortices or the lobes. So we study how there are certain parts that activate the body movement. And then when people start to see colors and images, they start to activate the back of the brain. When people feel sensations, that's the parietal lobe, which is at the top of the brain, mostly tactician. When people experience emotions and memory, that's happening in the temporal lobe. So what you would study if you stayed with this energy for a long time is that certain techniques in music, certain certain touches, certain body positions activate all of these. Now, what we've learned is it's actually possible to light up all of these simultaneously at the same time. Right now, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the basal ganglia. So the old brain is the brain in the middle. It's underneath the new brain. So when you think about thinking functions, sensations and whatnot, it's outside here. It's in the new brain, the outer brain, the gray area, which is underneath that. There's the white brain, which is still the cortex. If you want to understand the first brain that we activate in the energy work, it's actually the old brain. So this is the basal ganglia. It's made up of the caudate nucleus and the putamen and the globus pallidus. Now, dopamine, which is the energy of addiction, programs these as well. So when you reroute dopamine to here, there is the activation that people like to, as people like to call it. So let's try to understand what is activation. Okay, I'm losing my pen. Right, just a moment. It's there. It's getting dark here, so let me turn on the lights. How do you activate or reroute dopamine from the addiction pathways to the old brain, the reptilian brain? The easiest technique is intuitively easy to understand. Let's make some space. This is too big. Size. I don't just use my iPad for music. We use it for the trainings in order to visualize things. The basal ganglia is very sensitive to time. The time or the pacemaker of the brain is in the basal ganglia. So let's talk about time. We are altering time. There's a German term, because you guys are in Europe, I'm going to mention this. The Zeitgeber is a German word that means time giver. So anything that you expose the body to is a Zeitgeber. It could be you give people wine or beer. You can give them a hamburger. You could expose them to certain sounds, certain words. Those would often alter time because of the sensitivities in the autonomic nervous system. We can alter time, which means we can either speed up time or slow down time, or we can even do both of these, the making fast and slow at the same time. So the basal ganglia is the part of the brain that measures time. The old brain measures time. So when you conduct the tool of music, when you alter the time signature of music, which is measured by BPM, and you might get interested in the fact that we measure also the heart rate based on beats per minute, then there are in fact correlations between the beats per minute in music and the beats per minute of the heart. So when you speed up music, you actually speed up the heart rate. And when you slow down music, you slow down the heart rate. And a lot of that would involve neurotransmitters and hormones. That is not the only thing we would study in the long term. Like rhythm affects the heart. Harmony affects the breath. Melody affects the brain or the nervous system. So the body is actually musical. The body is a song. So when you learn to change the music, so let's say what we're talking about here is called tempo or rhythm. When you change the rhythm in the music, there are many techniques. We use DJ apps, we use synthesizers, we use in the work that we do. We don't like to use Spotify and borrow other people's music. What we do is we create or we teach people how to construct their own music. Or even if you use other people's music, you would learn apps that can change the BPM. If you are studying both neurology and even cardiology, brain, breath, and blood, um, because the animal brain or basal ganglia holds the pacemaker of the nervous system. When you alter rhythm, then what you are in fact changing is not just time, it's the awareness of dimensionality, dimensions. You can move people from either, it could be from the third dimension, you might move them back to the second dimension or move them into the fourth or the fifth dimension. So sometimes people say, wow, I went back to the dimension of the womb. I've been listening to this feedback for so many years. The first experiences I heard were about people say, I went back to the womb of the mother. I went back to the earth. I went into the dimension of the cosmos. I went into the dimension of the universe or the multiverse. Depending on how many layers you hold in basically what is called time or space, either through sequentiality or simultaneity. Certain music, certain ways of touching are more sequential. Certain verbalizations are more sequential, and then certain musics are more spatial, more layered in many ways, and that basically would control dimensionality. So there are terminologies in structuralism that we also use in the work that we do that either brings people into code or context. Technically, this is code or context aphasia, which are different dimensionalities of the mind, either based on time constructs or space constructs. Let me give an elaboration for this. So a lot of people are interested in, for example, light language. Why does that happen? Why do people start to speak like aliens or babies or animal beings? A lot of that has to do with it goes back to light. Light can spread across the brain. We should look at what that looks like specifically. Okay, so it's not really just about studying the regions of the brain, the new brain or the old brain. Light travels through bundles of nerve axons, and these are basically electrical pathways. So when you activate brains, what happens is you send light and electricity through these different regions. So especially in terms of the middle space between the two brains, you actually have two brains. Let's go back to the new brain where this would be visible. There's a separation, and these are called the commissures. So we think we have two like one brain, but we actually have two brains. There's space in between. And so the ways these two hemispheres communicate is through the nerve tracts or the commissures. So one of the ways to send electricity and magnetism through for example, the corpus callosum, which joins together the left and the right hemisphere, especially in the basal region of the brain. This sends a lot of light throughout the brain. So for those who are interested in light language, for example, we then send out a lot of electricity that starts to affect certain regions of the brain. So this region that I'm highlighting is called the Broca's area. And for those who know their their neuroscience, even the basics. The Broca's area is responsible for language production. And then the Wernicke's area is responsible for language comprehension. So when people start to speak in light language, what's happening is we're actually affecting the Broca's area and also the Wernicke's area. Now, you will notice that it only happens in one side. This is the left hemisphere of the brain. It's not in the right hemisphere because for most human beings, the brain is contralateralized, meaning there are opposing polar functions so that the left brain might be more responsible for sequential thinking, which is language, and then the other might be more responsible for music or artistic creation. So when you send a lot of electricity through the corpus callosum, what happens is the brain that is contralateralized becomes ipsilateralized, meaning the brain functions becomes shared so that there's not the clear distinction anymore between language and music. And for that reason, the brain actually becomes, the brain of the adult actually becomes like the brain of a baby, because the baby doesn't really have language yet. The brain of a baby is insanely interconnected. The baby has 100 billion neurons, and the adult brain has only about 50 to 70 or 80 billion neurons. So we lose a lot of those connections. And one way we lose those connections is through language acquisition. So when we go through a spiritual awakening, we become like babies. And that's what it means to send out light in the brain. So what we're establishing here is when you learn how to use music as a device, along with proprioception and touch, when you send out electricity, one of the main functions that happens is through rhythm in music. Okay, so when you learn to use techniques in music that either speeds up time or slows down time, and a lot of the music that you probably are noticing that are used in the journeys, they have very interesting ways they affect time. They can speed up or they can slow down, and they can hold a lot of layers together. You somehow develop an intuitive understanding of how song selection and song combination happens, and that can already alter in people's bodies what's called time perception, which is also dimensionality. Okay, let me do a time check. I think we've been together for about an hour and a half. We still have about 30 minutes. Okay, let me look at my, or is that true? Yeah, I would think. Wait, just give me a moment. I need to open my other notebook. Let's deepen this a little bit by looking at time not in the brain, but in the body. So let's open this up. Let's move from the spine to the heart. Okay, there's something very sensitive in the heart, and that is called this is a pacemaker of the heart. Let's get some help in looking for it. It's called the sinoatrial node. So when you expose people to music, you either can give people like a heart attack, you can speed up the heart rate, and you can increase stroke volume, or you can slow down the heart rate, depending if you're giving them relaxing music or stressful music. And these are basic trigger mechanisms. So as you can see, we do have, in fact, let's just generally clean up. We do have the ability to speed up what is happening up here in the brain. And we can also speed up what is in the heart using certain chemicals. Let me name them. Like in the brain, it would be glutamate and it would be dopamine. It's actually quite an interesting formula. When you combine glutamate and dopamine, what you have is an explosion that takes place in the basal ganglia region of the brain. There's a modulation of glutamatergic pathways that regulate the speed of the brain. If you want to slow that down, you work with other neurotransmitters, particularly, let's just erase that. Like you want to slow that down, then you would work with GABA. And these are very, very important to understand in terms of not just activation, but also learning functions. If you want to facilitate not just experiences, but also wisdom, when there's too much glutamatergic and dopaminergic pathways, which is what Kundalini activation is normally about, then we actually bring about an absence of wisdom. There's a way in which the mind starts to shut down for long periods of time. And so people start to have a harder time with certain cognitive functions because it's very hard to describe certain things. And the effects of that is nameable. It's called aphasia. Aphasia is a condition in which it becomes hard to name certain things. It becomes hard to talk, or it becomes hard to understand or comprehend certain things. So we study these in the process, in the inner dance process. We study what's called Broca's aphasia or Wernicke's aphasia. And if you understood this more, you would be able to take responsibility for when people lose their minds. You know, like a lot of the instructions, you have to lose your mind, but you may actually lose your mind. You also lose language functions. If you do this too much for too long, you will lose language and mental function. And that's when the energy that you're holding is too glutamatergic and dopaminergic. Now, in the body state, the same thing can happen. What you call, okay, I want to activate or raise my Kundalini. If you do that too much, what's happening here is you affect, remember, you can alter the rhythm of the heart, which is the SA node. This should be included in all trainings everywhere. When you do that too much, what happens is you combine the hormones called epinephrine. Some people know epinephrine through adrenaline. It's the same thing. It's actually more norepinephrine and cortisol. So when people focus too much on the adrenaline gland, when people try to press or sit on bellies, trying to activate the adrenal cortex or the adrenal medulla, these are basically in charge of the sympathetic fight or flight nervous system, and it creates stress response mechanism. So be very careful with how you try to just keep activating the solar plexus, because when you do this, one effect is you actually lower the immunity functions in the body. So even though you experience short-term healing process, when there is too much activation, then you create long-term problems in metabolism. So you would want to understand how to counteract or bring about homeostasis when maybe people have been exposed too much to stimulating energy. To counteract that with homeostatic um, balance, then you would try to understand um, how to release, let's say, acetylcholine. You know, these are the chemicals that are absolutely responsible for bringing about slowness or the parasympathetic nervous system, which gets people to enter what's called restive states. So don't just keep using the word activate, like I want to activate. It's actually very important to bring about rest and stability, to bring about slowness and not just fastness. So when you design music, and I'm really thankful for Sandra and Siegfried for constantly inviting me to speak in these trainings. My role here is to help you in the long term to understand how important it is to learn other elements that are just as important, like intelligence, wisdom, brilliance. For that to happen, you need to understand how memory works. How does memory work, and why do people remember certain things in the journey? And why is it that some people actually lose memory? Why do they forget certain patterns? And sometimes that is the goal. I want to forget my trauma. I want to forget certain patterns. But if you do that too much, you actually um, let go of a lot more than just your trauma. You might actually go into aphasia. And what's interesting about aphasia as a science is it goes hand in hand with another science. And were we to name that, that's called epilepsy. So when you watch people going into certain states, when I bring up this image, for example, um, no, not that program, this one. When you look at this image, this is epilepsy. The tonic phase is a type of epileptic seizure. The clonic phase is another. There could be the myoclonic phase, there could be the post-ictal stage. So what you're looking at is, in fact, surges of electricity. And epilepsy is basically a synchronization of action potentials that spreads across brain regions. When you spread out, so when people say activation, what you're doing is you're spreading activation throughout certain brain regions. So most people, when their bodies are moving, what you're experiencing is in fact an epileptic seizure that is more to do with the frontal lobe. So when people start to look epileptic in the process, and epilepsy doesn't just have to be the seizures that starts to happen. Sometimes when the body isn't moving, there are still epileptiform EEG impulses that we can read happening in the brain. Um, Epilepsy isn't a bad thing. Epilepsy is, in fact, in the old traditions called the sacred disease, especially in Greece. When people went through seizures, then that altered state is, in fact, in India related to a spiritual awakening. It's the medical process that um, framed the stigma that creates these fear responses in people, thinking that the surge is always going to be dangerous. So you are, in fact, very controversial in a way that when you trigger this in people's bodies, what you're doing is you're creating an epileptic seizure in a sustained way, because very often an epileptic seizure happens in minutes. We're in fact sustaining that for a long time. Now, just to eradicate certain doubts or skepticisms or fear that might trigger, some of the greatest genius in history were in fact epileptic, and that includes Einstein. Einstein had epileptic seizures. Aristotle had epileptic seizures. Nabokov, Leonardo da Vinci. So what we're doing is we're releasing a lot of the trapped electricity that had been sustained in these restrained ways because of our tendency to try to control life situations, which is managed technically through beta state consciousness. So in a way, we're reversing history by reversing our paradigms on fear, the fear of losing control. So I brought up epilepsy to help you understand why aphasia happens. Light language is a form of aphasia, which we now have mapped out happens because we are spreading light or energy throughout the brain. We're wiping away old patterns, fear patterns. And in many ways, this is good. It's a dream. A lot of people are doubtful that we can change or we can heal. But in fact, something we're doing, and we can study this in the long term, we're creating the conditions where the brain could become the child mind. The child mind is innocent, is in wonder, is in awe. And when you are the child mind, you can change. You can change old patterns. So the seizure brings about the child mind. Aphasia understanding that language constructs personality, thinking patterns, what would it take to, in fact, change people in the long term? Electricity surging through the brain can do that, which then would get mirrored throughout the whole body. That's the first part. In the long term, were we to bring more responsibility to this, especially if you're learning to hold this for other people, you would then be interested in stabilizing the energy. So if you learn to balance this in a wave-like structure, studying what the 12 stages might look like, then you won't just empty minds. It's not enough to make people childlike, because childlike can also be very childish, and we do see all kinds of personality sensitivities in the awakening process that's not always going to look spiritual. It would look very emotional, very sensitive, until stability or the unitive state sets in. So there are different methodologies and techniques that you might improve upon as you begin with an intuitive starting point. So in our work, we work with doctors, we work with prisons, we work with governments. But one of our favorite projects is we're working with schools. We're working with, in the Philippines, we work with the Department of Education, and we've actually brought the inner dance to the schooling system. We're now building actual schools made of eco bricks and mud housing, and we're building classrooms for the energy that schools are accepting. Of course, we don't use terms that would not be acceptable. Like Kundalini would not be acceptable in the schooling system in the Philippines. We are the biggest Catholic country in Asia. And so what we do is we bring science. We speak about all these things that we talked about here. In fact, we teach the very same thing to high school children. We use music, we use art, then we let them experience, and then we bring in the electroencephalogram. We bring EEGs into the classroom. We get the children to watch their own brain waves. We teach them neurology. It's actually very, very interesting how we found the way to enter into the system. And we have to thank the experimentations, the journeys, the global experience that's been happening over the last 17 years that now has this long lineage. So a lot of the movements that began after the Kundalini activation process, or CAP, which actually came from the inner dance, the founder of CAP, Venet Wong, used to call his processes inner dance trainings, until he decided that he would erase the name and call it something else for whatever reasons he had. That happened in 2018. Inner dance began in 2006 and 7. A lot of people are now wanting to borrow from the insights and frameworks that might have come from where did this all begin. And this is really beyond inner dance. This is beyond me. I'm really just here because of all the observations that we have made over the years. Our goal now is to free up this gift so that everyone can access this, especially in the countries that need it the most, that don't have access to the resources and systems that a lot of you enjoy. So especially in how we ground this in ecology, how we shift into a way of connecting with the earth. A lot of this needs to jump out of just the yoga centers and the ashrams. A lot of this actually needs to go out there in the world. So one of our biggest conversations now is, how do we translate what we have learned from the spiritual awakening, so this doesn't need to happen in secret? It also doesn't always need to be mysterious. We don't need to keep thinking that this is not going to be understood. We actually can bring this out in the open, and for that reason, we are in conversations with many science-based people. So especially as you guys are in Europe, a lot of you might understand that to bring this to institutions, there has to be terminologies, terms of references, that would allow this to be acceptable. So we're working with schools in Europe, we're working with doctors, we're actually working with someone who's about to bring this into the jail system in Europe. We are working together. All of us are now working together. There's no point in separating our communities. What we're interested in is how is the process actually the same that people now call different names? Like, where is the meeting point? We feel that that is going to be in the scientific domain. So we're really happy that the Kundalini activation training Sandra and Siegfried are running are always in collaboration. It's not competitive, it's in collaboration with the inner dance community. And we're really open that maybe in the next years we might call this something else. We're not attached to what we might call this now. What we are valuing is, do we understand what we are doing, whatever we call it, you know? Like when we attend the training, is there a real framework that can safely ferry this into the world, considering the vulnerable nature of the work that we do, that you never know what might happen to the people who come. So how do we not just explode bodies, but how do we ensure that you're safe and that we are balancing people? So I want to thank you for giving me time from my humble space. I offer this to you. This took lifetimes to conduct. There's a lot more that can be shared, but for the limited amount of time, this is what I freely offer you. I'm not sure if there might be some questions that might be there. We don't have that much time, but I am here in case you guys might have some inquiries while we're together.
Thank you. Thank you, Pai.
Pai. We wanted to say before the questions that Pai is giving an amazing training that starts, Pai,
in January. So if you wanna share a little bit about the training when it starts, it's an online training. It's like 9 months, but you can say a few things about if somebody is interested in deepening.
Sure. I think as a compliment, like we support the Kundalini activation training that Sandra and Siegfried are holding, and I feel it's a very safe space that balances a lot of people's energies. It's coming from a lot of love and wisdom combined. So the inner dance offers support for that community, especially because of the long collaboration we've held. So by way of doing that, we offer actually like a year-long training for those who understand that to study this doesn't take just weeks or months. So if this can make the community stronger, then there are collaborations between local groups and the global classroom community, and we're still studying how that could happen. You're always welcome to come to Palawan. In fact, there were 3 people who came from Sandra and Siegfried's community in the training that we just finished. I think two of them have left by today, and then one of them is still here. And the energies coming from your community are always, for us, super clear and admirable. So anyone who wants to visit us, Sandra and Siegfried are actually coming here maybe in February. Come with them and we'll have a really good time up in our mountain in Palawan province, one of the most beautiful places in the world, and it's in the Philippines. So for those who are going to be cold, come to us and we'll be warm together. We'll have bonfires and inner dance journeys here.
Thank you very much, Pai. So we open up for the questions for people.
we have some questions.
Can you hear properly through this microphone?
Hello. I have.
Say like your name.
Hello, I'm Mariama and I'm from the UK. I had a couple of questions. One, when you were talking about sort of rerouting dopamine and talking about the effects on things like attention, memory, movement, and so on. I was wondering if when you're kind of tailoring the sessions with the music and things, if there is a difference that should be made for, say, people with ADHD, because dopamine is an issue there. If they experience it differently, or if there are things that we should be doing differently for them, but also if there should be a difference between how we do it for adults who obviously come with a knowledge of what's happening, and how we would do a session, say, with a younger child, how that would, we may tailor it slightly differently.
Yeah, I like these questions. The last one's always been interesting. Like when we think about where are people coming from, the children are coming fresh. They're empty. They're in a learning process. So definitely their endocrine system and their brain states won't be the same. So they require a totally different system. Adults, when they do come, normally they're in a purgation where they're throwing stuff out. Children are letting things in, right? Letting out or letting in. So take addiction, for example. There are interesting programs globally where people are trying to work this into addiction clinics or addiction centers. So when we talk about addiction, we can't generalize that. We would ask, okay, when you say addiction, what do you mean? Are you addicted to uppers or downers, stimulants or depressants? So already there, we can tailor fit. If people are too overstimulated, then we need to bring the energy down. If people are in states of depression, what they need is stimulation. So at the end of the day, the crossing over of both systems need to combine with each other. So going back to your initial question about dopamine and ADHD and ADD, even schizophrenia, which dopamine is implicated in. Yeah, this is all well and good. I think what is relevant in this is when there's too much dopamine being released, then there are two main chemicals that I'm interested in that gets reduced, one of which is serotonin. Let me show an interesting screen that looks at this. And I hope this is visible. Well, you're in front, so you can do this. Dopamine, first off, when we look at the map, dopamine receptors are quite few in the brain. So dopamine is responsible not really for pleasure, but the anticipation of pleasure. Oops. Serotonin is quite different. Serotonin is responsible for happiness. And when you look at the receptors in the brain for the serotonergic pathways, there are more. Now, when you release too much dopamine, serotonin actually goes down. So let's compare serotonin and dopamine. Dopamine is addictive. It's short-term. It's felt more in the body, and it inspires greed. It also is kind of binging, and it's never enough. That's what makes it addictive. Serotonin is interesting because it's not addictive. The effects are long-term. You know, it's felt above the neck, so it can lead to wisdom, and it inspires generosity. It's generous. It's shareable, and it leads to satiation. It triggers the brain where you say, I'm actually okay right now, don't need more. Already that's interesting that when we activate dopamine centers too much, serotonergic pathways close up. Now, that's not the only interesting pathway that we trigger. Let me borrow from my screen again to look at your question, your set of questions completely. I like your question on ADHD. So one of the things that dopamine also inhibits, if dopamine goes up, one of the things that goes down is glutamate GABA. And this could be one of the reasons why ADHD happens. Glutamate and GABA are responsible for learning. when we depress glutamate and GABA, let's say dopamine is high and glutamate and GABA goes down, learning actually becomes difficult. And that's one of the reasons why ADD and ADHD happens. Let's bring it back because it's useful. No, actually, let's take this out because there's something else that is very, very interesting. It's called prolactin. Prolactin is an oligodendrocyte precursor cell. Now, let me not make that sound so expensive and difficult to understand. Prolactin, if it's oligodendrocytes, is responsible for myelination. Now, myelin is the part of the brain. Let's say this is a neuron, and then here's an axon that connects to another neuron. Myelin covers the axon, allowing for the transmission of information to increase, let's say 100 to 1,000 fold. So transmission could be 100 to 1,000 times faster, and also it can travel much longer. So when there's too much dopamine, myelination goes down. That means the transmission of information, instead of going up, it goes down. And that's why ADD and ADHD is happening. That is not the only mapping. One of the reasons why people start to go into ADD and ADHD in the dopamine high, which can happen in the energy work, is this. It has something to do with brain waves. So delta and theta would be the more relaxed, slower brain waves. And when delta and theta start to enter the brain while we were awake, especially if it enters the left hemisphere of the brain, we experience ADD and ADHD. Normally, for us to pay attention, what we need is beta, and beta especially needs to enter the left brain. So what allows that to happen is dopamine, in fact. But when dopamine levels become too high, then this is severely affected. So in order to balance that, there's a homeostatic reflex so that the theta and delta actually starts to rise up in order to protect the brain. And that leads to difficulties in paying attention. I wouldn't go too much into a fear states in studying this, because I do believe that ADD and ADHD are spiritual awakening symptoms, and that could lead to higher states of attention later on, from a much more nonlinear state. So children who don't do well in school, when they do go through a lot of the processes that we go through, there is a higher attention span that eventually could come. So in many ways, we do need to trust more or less what is happening in the beginning. My advice would be, if you remember the wave that I described that mimics the sleep cycles, spending more time in the rest state allows for the myelination and the consolidation of memory. And when people are able to scaffold the brain state in more organized states that happens at a time of rest, attention will be enabled, and it will be the type of attention that could do multitasking. I feel the superhuman would need to be able to hold multiple dimensionalities. So I wouldn't judge ADD in the beginning too quickly, because it holds a role in helping us go into multidimensionality. We can't pay attention to singular tasks, but later we can actually hold multiple tasks. So the training facilitators are getting in holding spaces, like energy spaces, we're actually holding multiple bodies, multiple bits of information, and music helps us a lot. So the wisdom centers might come up maybe after years of holding the only thing that I do address to people is never stop learning. Always keep training your mind and your body so that neuroplasticity happens. So as you keep going into energy states, this multidimensional attention span will still, it would still possibly emerge rather than the mind just blanking out and having a hard time like thinking and remembering things. I speak this from deep experience. I really saw some amazing facilitators start to lose their memory and their attention after 3 years or 4 years of conducting just the basic energy work. I actually promote that people eventually do immersions and longer, I don't want to call them trainings yet because I don't want to push people to train too early, but eventually you would want to give more information to the people that you're holding and not just getting them to lay down and entering the child mind. People will have questions, and when you have the ability to deliver explanations to those who would have these questions, your own brain would go through a neuroplastic evolutionary process. And I think all of us need to learn how to hold not just energy, but wisdom. So ADD wouldn't even be an issue later on. What we would be experiencing is genius, brilliance, and like amazing minds and hearts. I really like your question. Thank you. Is there anything
you so
else? This is clarify. It helps.
Yeah, and just a little bit on the if you were doing a session with a younger child,
Oh, yeah.
if you do anything differently,
Yes,
because
definitely.
they're receiving differently.
Yeah. Yeah. In general, the same formula would work, but in the long term, when you bring this to schools, we do need to adapt to different processes. Actually, to make a lengthy answer, and I guess this is generally interesting for a lot of people, that's why it's okay to just keep going. With children, what we are using isn't just a workshop where we are constructing what's called a sleep playlist. So we're constructing soundscapes that children would be exposed to at the onset of sleep. The sleep playlist would be about 3 hours long. And we've heard some really magical feedbacks from parents of children who had so many different emotional, cognitive, and physiological problems. So with children, the sleep playlists seem to work a lot more than in the adults. And a lot of this technology actually comes from where we're coming from. The first experimentations on using the vibrations began in London, I think a year and a half ago. And around the world, a lot of this is being practiced with what began in your own neighborhood. So this might interest you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Bye. I have a question.
Your name, where you come from?
My name is Santino. I'm from Amsterdam.
Hmm.
I have a question regarding the field and the technique used in the field. So is there anything else except the sound that you could clarify on?
I mentioned proprioception, which is the way you position the body. The first thing we teach people is to extend the right arm. When you extend the right arm is actually an extension of the left brain. The left brain is the thinking brain or the sequential brain. So if you want to open up time or sequentiality, open the right arm of everyone in the room, no matter what's happening. Let's just go through the journey. You're opening time to become space. The others would be tactician, which is touch. So what we study is how the body would be mapped out according to certain grids or matrices. We don't have time to go over it today. We do put out a lot of free information. You can find that in YouTube on our channel. Beyond music, in that language or words would be the most powerful. So what we study in general would be image schemas, or what would be called conceptual metaphors. So when the body moves in certain ways, there is a body language that has to do with image schemes or blueprints in the system. So instead of just trying to manipulate the body, what we try to understand is how does conceptualization and knowledge come about from the ways these images are shaping the mind. So I would study how bodies could be positioned if what you're looking for is something pragmatic or concrete. Doing simple things like changing the direction of the head. In the entorhinal cortex, there are these cells called the head direction cells. And when you change the direction of the head, what you're doing is you're affecting the brain's GPS system. You're changing perspective by changing the map. So there are all these navigational systems. So just try to inspire yourself by imagining that the energy field is like a whole map, and that map is spread across the whole body, so that now in the cognitive sciences, this is not the brain anymore. The whole body is the brain. And when you work with energy, you're working with the extended mind, where small techniques that would displace attention that might be stuck here in the prefrontal cortex, when you stretch out the mind, let's say the mind starts to stretch out from there to there are different techniques to display. So I think a lot of that is learned intuitively. Facilitators either would take objects from around, it could be crystals or rocks, and then they'd start to place them across the bodies. That would displace or unposition the attention span, so that if the mind was here, because of our visual function, then the mind started to go to the right toe or the shoulder or somewhere there in the room. It you know how consciousness can start to stretch out. Do what you can by stretching the body that stretches the mind. You already would use feedback in observing that, okay, I know that this body is closed because they're crossing their arm. Understanding that the arms are extensions of the hemispheres of the brain, slowly expanding the right arm expands the resistances in the left brain. Later on, maybe you expand the left arm, you're extending the right brain. Then you maybe lift the right arm a little bit, then leave it alone. Maybe it starts to move because of the way you are impacting the autonomic nervous system. Remember or realize that I brought up music only as a metaphorical representation of the nervous system. The real tool is this, it's the body. So when you learn how to use technology, the first technology is the organism. It's the AI that is not artificial intelligence, but is authentic intelligence. So what you would study would be the sensory modalities like touch, sound, image, smell is very powerful. When people use essential oils, the olfactory senses is the oldest sensory modality. The sense of smell was there since the womb. So when you use smell, you activate memories. The oldest memories are activated by smell, which is here in the temporal lobe, because emotions, memory, and smell are very closely related to each other. So a lot of people, this is what I observed, they don't even need to touch bodies yet. Were you to open, giving presents, don't touch them. Let them remember through olfaction or smell, because then that has more regionality. So put all those together, not just sense of smell, sight, sound, but the sense of balance. There are certain techniques to offset balance that changes equilibrium. You know, people feel like, okay, I'm falling down, or I'm rising up. I don't know anymore what is up and down. What you do is you create a concert or a symphony, bring together all the senses. That's the nature of the work. It's not just one sense, it's not just music. It's understanding how to handle all of these senses at the same time in accordance to the wave that you design, according to the stage in transformation is happening. When is it time to go up? How do I design that in the whole room, not just for 2 or 3 people? When is it time to descend together? So you design the journey, and you either can bring them into a personal experience, childhood, the womb, or do you want to take them to Earth? Do you want to take them back to the memory of the Earth, to deep history? Do you want to take them to the universe? Now, what would be the signaling or priming tools in order to bring them there? It's up to you. You would coordinate that, like what sounds, what ways of touching, and what vibrations would prime them to go to Saturn or to Pluto. It's really, I mean, words are very, very powerful. Out of all the tools, what people don't realize is the greatest container is language. Language combines in the association areas of the brain the senses. So a word is actually a sound image. This is basic semiotics. A word is a sound image. Inside a word are images and sounds, and what weaves them together is the dance or the movement. Movement is not just kinesthesia. Movement is about awareness of the space. So when a baby moves around the room, what they're doing is they're mapping out the space. So when people start either moving the body or moving in the body, like moving across the room or the inner space, movement plays that part that brings together the sounds and the images. So when you speak certain words, what you're doing is you're holding space for sounds and images you contain. So certain words that you use can be really, really powerful and enabling. It contains people. It brings about safety and security. So you start to channel, okay, I'm on the way to the space. What am I sensing? What am I channeling that might speak to people, meeting them where they are at? I hope that illuminates and helps.
Very helpful, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe 1 or 2 more, and we come to closing.
In Lucille group, some questions?
Yeah. Maybe in the group of Lucille. Lucille, is there any question from your group?
No, there are no questions. They are like awesome, like wow, impressive.
Thank
Very
you.
grateful.
Where are you guys? Where's that room?
Lucille,
In France, we
In
are
Spain.
1 hour from Toulouse in the south of France.
Okay. Thank you. Gracias. Hola.
Bonjour.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi everyone, I'm Eva, I'm from Belgium. And what I was wondering is that if you do an activation or a session, and if it's always round up when the session is rounded up, or is there a possibility that it moves further, or that it maybe like relives, or that it happens like that?
Yeah. I don't think there's ever a real finish, because then it's about life. But at the same time, I think we just need to empower ourselves. You will know when it's finished. The way of finishing is usually the same anyway. You don't finish with an explosion. You need to help people reintegrate. You will not always be satisfied, because let's say you have 10 people or 20 people in a room. You will know that some people still need to go deeper, and that will have to wait for the next process. And I think this is a problem in the Western situation where you're borrowing a room, you're renting, and now there are people waiting outside to come into the room. So what you would study is to perform many, many waves. Let's go, while we're together, let's spend time on this. Let's share the screen. Give me a minute to connect. It's starting you. No, let's just clean everything up. Okay. There's a rule or a law that we have found out very early on, and it's called the law. Wait, I don't know why why this should be deeper. Let's try the fountain pen. The law of contrast. You might call it contradictions or opposite, or also paradox. The law of opposites. So a lot of the changes or the intensities happen when you move from one state to another. So the state could be, there could be fast music, and then you move to slower music. So it could be either you put on something dance-based, electronic dance music, techno. You could put in a song by Guns N' Roses or Queen, Elton John, and then you move to something slow, like let's say meditative, or something classical like Johann Sebastian Bach's Air on the G string. When you move from the intensity of the fast to the slow, that's actually, interestingly, when something happens. That's when the energy rises up, which is paradoxical because you're trying to lower the vibration. And then when you move again from slow to fast, that's when the energy once again shifts. So when you stay stagnant and you stay within just one vibration that is, let's say, measurable through tempo or BPM, then there's no change. So even if you move from, let's say, slowest to slower, and maybe it's not that much of a difference. Let's say this is 30 BPM. Now, to the human body or brain, underneath 40 beats per minute, it's not recognizable as music. It would need to be maybe a tempo of about 45 to 50 beats per minute that it would sound like music to people. Anything slower than that would be, it wouldn't be music for most people. So let's say you've gone through many repetitions of movement, from fast and slow. When you move from 50 BPM to maybe 60 or 65 BPM, maybe even just 55, people will notice the difference. So the technique that people use when music is involved, you have to move. The law of contrast, the law of contradiction or paradox is important for the autonomic nervous system to not judge the difference between high and low, good or bad, light and dark, or the sympathetic, which is fight or flight, and the parasympathetic. So in this way, you're actually bringing about non-duality. So people who are exposed to a lot of judgment and emotional, like resistances, when we give them opportunities to stop judging by exposing them to differentiation, then people become the space in between. People become the space in between, and we don't know anymore if something is fast or slow. We're helping the autonomic nervous system go into there's no difference. So the more you use the law of contrast in the process, which we have mapped out within the wave, which has the 12 stages, or the sleep cycle journey into REM state. When you're dealing with an advanced group, this may not work with beginner groups, but when you're dealing with people who are well on their way in the stages of transformation, the more you bring about the contrast from the high to the low, the more that they would be able to hold what would be the spectrum or the range of vibration. Remember, this is gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta. When you activate all the brain waves, this is what the body is missing, because when we're in judgment, a lot of the time we're actually just in beta state. What we're looking for is the higher frequencies that's in gamma. And a lot of that's actually possible by co-activating delta. The body holds slow and the fast can move through. And the science that studies that is called neural frequency coupling. Coupling means the slow waves gate the fast waves. The brain has an amazing way of averaging out the waves to make it just one. So let's say this is a slow wave, and then it can hold many fast waves, slow and fast. This is what neural frequency looks like, and that happens in the dream state. So the more you can bring this kind of patterning, which is where insight, visions, integration occur, then you would reach that sense of completion. Now, in the beginning, we were using this formula in the inner dance process, but right now, a lot of our playlisting systems, and this is actually very popular in Belgium. A lot of people facilitating in Belgium are studying how music could hold contrast, not sequentially, but simultaneously, where like let's study dimension. Dimension. Do we know what dimension actually is? Let's take certain letters away one at a time. Let's take away N, put that here. Take away O. Take O, take I off, take S off, take E off. And then let's take the letter M off. Put that here. Let's take the I off. Put that there. And then take away D. Dimension is actually mind noise. So most human beings are barely using their brain capacity. We're using maybe 3 or 5% of the brain. What is happening to 95% of the brain? So when we were babies, when we were born, we were using maybe 95% of the brain, and now we're only using 5% of the brain because we got too smart. The smarter we get, the more stupid we actually get. So when the baby is in the last stages of being in the womb, I'm not a good artist, so let's say I'm pretending this is a baby. This is a baby, cute. The baby is maybe sleeping 95% of the time, and 95% of that sleep time, this is the last week in the womb, the baby is in REM state maybe 95% of the time. The statistics could vary. It could be a little bit less, but it could be around that. So the dreamer will be the most awake during the last week in the womb. Now, right now, most human adults are sleeping 30% of the day, which is maybe 8 hours of the 24 hours. And of the 30% of the day, we are in REM state only 15% during sleep. Now, REM state is when magic happens. It's when healing happens. So dimensionality is, in fact, noisy. So there's a reason why there's a quietness that comes to people in the kind of loudness that we expose ourselves into, because we're trying to remember the unconscious. So when we add layers, there's a chance that we can, in fact, bring completion earlier in the process. So this needs to be experienced and studied. Maybe Sandra and Siegfried can share some playlisting systems that some people experience as weird in the beginning, but it's actually in Belgium where facilitators have been experimenting with noise more than music, and the feedbacks have been really amazing. Like we're getting stories from people from Brussels, from Antwerp, from Bornholm, that people are entering into dimensions. So sometimes when you first get exposed to that, it feels like you're sleeping or you're coming from some kind of dream space. But the memory of that feels like a lot happened. So imagine if you woke up after death, or you were still sleeping and you woke up inside your sleep, what would you see? What you would see is dimensionality. It would be inception dreams, where there is a dream inside the dream where there's a lot more time. Like a single minute might be 10 years or 5 years. We're training the brain to do that. So the more you expose your participants to all these different techniques, that's why there is no closure, because closure would be 100% of brain capacity is impossible right now for us to imagine. But on the way to that, even if you add 1% brain capacity, that's already quite overwhelming for people to manage. So we practice, okay, just maybe 0.1% today, or 0.02%. That's already quite big in the synaptic connectivity that we're not used to. So take your time, and if people keep coming back, then you change the style. What we advise people, don't keep using the same music, because when you teach people to anticipate the same trigger responses, what you want is to bring variation to the synaptic plasticity of the brain. Don't teach people to keep reacting to the same songs. You will teach them how to get addicted. Keep giving them surprising processes that will allow the process not to be dopaminergic in nature. It could lead to the production of oligodendrocytes that leads to myelination of the brain, the release of serotonin. So what you would have are people walking around dreaming. This is the nature of the work. We're teaching people how to dream again, not while we're sleeping, but to dream while awake. And I think there are no limits to this, because we are infinite. So don't try to. My wife is from Finland, and when we open the space, we say we were finished before we even started. So in a way, we're already, we're already done, but at the same time, we're looking for beginnings so we can enjoy the remembrance process. And because of the nature of our states of the body and the mind, every single step will feel like the infinite if we don't lose the most important element that holds the whole field together, and that's called trust. So now, no matter what happens, don't lose trust. So every step in the space of trust would be, it's all perfect. So enjoy, play, and be prepared for anything that might come. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, what a great closing with the word trust, and to decide to trust what we also constantly remind ourselves, and to be open to go into that experiences. So question to you, by any suggestion from your intuitive mind, what kind of music we should use for the upcoming inner dance session with the group? The microphone.
We don't hear you.
Let's go for Sifting Soil. That one has a heartbeat or a rhythmicity that I think would work for this group.
Okay. Perfect.
And then get back to me. I'm really interested in hearing the feedbacks from this amazing community.
Thank you. We will record some of the feedbacks after the session and then share it with you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. We know it's late over there. You had a very, very full day. So we really feel honored that you extend your your normal sleeping hours to be with us. So
It's early.
Thank
It's
you.
only 7. It's just that we ended the 15-day training, so
okay.
I'm looking forward to resting. But I really look forward to being with you, so I wouldn't give this up. This energizes me. Okay, so bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.
See you here, or we see you there.
Yes. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. I'll end this.
Love you.
Love you all.